Time when the wealthiest people of this country have seen a tremendous increase in their income, while at the same time the standard of living of working people and poor people has declined. I will be damned if I will vote for a proposal which will stick it to the middle class and the working people. And Mr. Speaker, I've got a problem. I've got a problem with a president and a Congress which allows 5 million children to go hungry, 2 million people to sleep out on the streets, cities to become breeding grounds for drugs and violence. And they say, we're getting tough on crime. If you want to get tough on crime, let's deal with the causes of crime. Let's demand that every man, woman, and child in this country have a decent opportunity and a decent standard of living. Let's not keep putting poor people into jail and disproportionately punishing blacks. While our children go hungry and sleep out on the streets, lack adequate health care or educational opportunity, the wealthiest people in this country have grown far richer while their tax burden has declined. We have an approach to campaign financing which, to a very large degree, allows wealthy people and major corporations to buy and sell politicians. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and ordinary Americans are shut out of the political system. The United States today is one of 2 nations in the industrialized world that does not have a national health care system. That has to do with campaign finance reform. The United States today, the chief executive officers are seeing their salaries soar, and the gap between the rich and the poor grows wider. 10 million Americans are unemployed. That has to do with campaign finance reform. The system, by and large, is owned and controlled by big money interests, and the President of the United States and much of the Congress does the work of protecting the big corporations and the wealthy people who control the economic and political life of this nation. This country, this great country, this democracy, is evolving into an oligarchy. And an oligarchy is a country in which a few people have tremendous wealth and tremendous power and exercise that wealth and that power over all. We have seen a situation where we give huge tax breaks to the wealthy and you have 2 million people sleeping out on the street. Billions of dollars into all kinds of obsolete weapon systems, and you have 5 million children who are hungry. Let us give hope to people in America today who have lost hope. Let us provide jobs for the jobless, housing for the homeless, food for the hungry. Workers in the United
Whoopi Goldberg hasn't seen these videos. I could go back year after year after year, and what we're talking about now, meaning the country getting to the certain point of a wokeness, where there are certain things that we want in this particular country that they have in Western countries in Europe, we want change. We want something different. People are freaking out because of Trump, but all things being equal, Trump to some degree is a symptom of those people wanting something radically different. Sanders has been on this particular thread going back for 20 and 30 years. I can show you a video. In fact, I will show you a video. This is Sanders back in 1987. Talking about what the other candidates was talking about in the climate debate or climate forum yesterday.
Some of you may have seen there were some articles in the newspaper recently about the destruction of the ozone layer and the fact that the climate, the temperature on Earth may rise a few degrees. Is that significant? Does that just mean that the summer will be a little bit warm, we can go swimming another day or two? Okay?
Well, it's not. It doesn't seem significant, but if it gets like hardly any warmer, the polar ice caps could melt and like flood the oceans.
Precisely.
And flood us.
The point being that if you don't think that raising temperature a few degrees is an enormous consequence, you're very wrong. Because
1987. 1987. So, one Mr. Bernie Sanders, who's been pushing for civil rights, workers' rights, workers' protections, literally in the civil rights movement, because I guarantee you nobody told Bernie Sanders didn't think I'm going to be president one day, so I need to get myself arrested. No, he was doing that because it dug into him. Year after year after year, he's been right on one issue after the next, especially on this notion of corporations are running Washington and their power in this process needs to be curtailed. So why is it that when one Bernie Sanders, who's been pushing for these things for 30 years, and where there is video after video after video, clip after clip after clip, being literally considered the radical member of Congress, they put him in a corner, and that's the radical lefty. That's the radical. That's the guy who you don't really take all that serious and everything else. That guy is now number 2 in the race, and in some polls, number 1 in the race. And Whoopi Goldberg, for some reason, doesn't know that. She doesn't know that. She doesn't know that Bernie Sanders, from the standpoint of companies like Amazon and Exxon and all these other companies, he is considered an existential threat, even among members of the Democratic Party itself, who don't even consider him a Democrat. They consider him a radical. He's calling for a political revolution. And yet, Whoopi Goldberg talks to him as if, what have you done? This Andrew Yang guy, the Asian guy, is saying he's going to give me $1,000. What have you done, Bernie Sanders? I'm going to show you this clip. I have a little sympathy for Whoopi Goldberg on this. She's perversely wrong. Her rage and belligerence is completely misdirected. But the fact that she's a bit rageful in and of itself to some degree is potentially a positive development. She recognizes and understands, oh my God, the system is corrupt. Did anybody else know this? Amazon paid no money. They paid no taxes. Did anybody else know this? What have you done, Bernie Sanders? What he's done, Whoopi, is to be fighting for workers' rights, gay rights, civil rights, and yes, against those multinational corporations and against even the corporation itself, Amazon, that you use in your example, for the past 30 years. Your rage is appreciated, but your rage is misdirected. Let's take a look at Whoopi Goldberg. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. You might as well say Soapbox After Dark. I think it's like 11:30. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back here often, please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, because again, I come at all times. That sounds really, really disgusting. I am online at multiple times, particularly at times of the night, seeing as I'm an insomniac. And my typical saying is, when real men can't sleep, real men do the news. And so here I am doing the news. I'm going to keep this video relatively quick, because there's not a huge amount to heap on this video that I haven't necessarily said in the first part of this video. The notion, however, that you are talking to somebody who considers himself a democratic socialist and adds the label socialist in it and carries that label with all of the slings and arrows that goes associated with that label and all of the misunderstandings that go associated with that label. But here's the catch. Whoopi Goldberg will be no different than talking to my grandmother. If I needed to talk to my grandmother about politics, it may be the exact same conversation that Whoopi Goldberg is having. Whoopi Goldberg is an African American. And from the standpoint of African Americans, they tend to be ensconced in the Democratic Party. On top of her being an African American and being ensconced in the Democratic Party, there's one thing that most African Americans have associated with them that is ingrained in them: keep the Republicans out of office. There are some monsters in that cupboard that you need to keep out of office. Meaning, the impetus for most blacks to vote, in this case, is not that you have a two-party system, that you have one party, because the other party is, doesn't necessarily apply. And so in this case, it becomes who can keep the bad people out. The impetus is fear, not love. It's not that this particular guy has a particular vision of the world that I want to put my cosign behind. It's more so as, can he keep the other monsters at bay? And if so, I give him a pass on this other nonsense that he wants to do. It's usually fear, not love. My mom was talking to my aunt, my great aunt, and she says, you know, Joe Biden is the only thing that can keep Trump out of office. And my mom just asks, why do you think that? And she says, I mean, he is. It's Joe Biden. Yeah. But why do you think that? There's nothing underlying that other than her perspective of the world. I'm making the point that Whoopi Goldberg is not that much different in that sense. I mean, it's not that she's a political analyst per se. She sits on a show where they just kind of talk about all sorts of stuff, and every so often it intersects with politics. Bernie Sanders, in this case, I would wager, from Whoopi Goldberg's perspective, is heaped into the category of the unruly types, like AOC and Ilhan Omar and all of these other people who want to upend what it is to be a Democrat. She's comfortable with what it means to be a Democrat. And so Sanders being lumped in with AOC, because if you remember, Goldberg had issues with AOC once before in the past. Oh, these guys are trying to upend this process. Oh, these guys are trying to blow up the Democratic Party. She was pissed off at this. She was very angry at this, making the point that, oh, some of these old guys like John Lewis was fighting for civil rights. You know who's fighting for civil rights, Whoopi? That guy. That's Sanders. That's also Sanders. And that's Martin Luther King at the bottom. You know who's fighting for civil rights? Whoopi. This guy. Get on Twitter. Get on Facebook. Find somebody. Pay somebody. I'm pretty sure you're well paid. To go give you news articles. To go give you YouTube clips like this. They proliferate the internet. They're all over the place. You can look over the last 30 years of Bernie Sanders out there doing what you are asking him. Why wasn't he doing? Or if he was doing it at all. This clip is sad. Even though, again, I accept her anger and rage at the sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with the system where Amazon will pay zero tax. And for her to be angry about that, my point is your anger is misplaced. And if you really care about that, and if that really digs in you, the guy who you want to talk to is the guy over there who's talking about the transformational program of pretty much every sector of American public, who the fat cats and Wall Street, the corporations that run and fund the Democratic Party, look at this guy as an existential threat. They're terrified of him. He's not taking their money. He's not under their thumb. Everyone else in the Democratic Party is. And there's something to be said that they don't consider a Democrat. That's actually a good thing. Let's hear this terse conversation between Goldberg and Sanders.
Can I ask a question? Andrew Yang was here and made perfect sense to me. And I haven't heard really anybody else in the party, whatever party we're talking about, say, hey, do you realize that if Facebook and Amazon and all the other gigantic corporations paid any tax, we could find some relief for regular Americans? Sure.
Whoopi Goldberg hasn't heard anybody else say that, which means that Whoopi Goldberg has had her head firmly in the ground. Now, I'm not going to say bad things about Guinan, so I'm controlling what I say in this particular situation because I like Guinan. And again, I accept her anger and her rage, and I appreciate her anger and her rage at recognizing that the system is grotesquely unfair. I dig that. It's just that if you're talking to Bernie Sanders, and this is something Bernie Sanders doesn't shut up about, he hasn't shut up about it going back to the 1990s. I can show you clips. Why don't you know that before you're saying this? Meaning, it is absurd. If you are on Twitter and you are on Bernie Sanders' Twitter page, Bernie Sanders deludes you constantly with the exact thing that you're talking about. Amazon paid no taxes. Walmart's not paying its people. Well, Disney needs to do blah, blah, blah. We need a union. We need worker co-ops. We need all of these things. So what is she talking about? What is she talking about? Andrew Yang? Andrew Yang? Sanders has been doing this before Yang was even born. Yes, he's father time.
United States today are working longer hours, significantly longer hours, taking less vacation time than they used to take. And is there any wonder why so many millions of Americans feel stressed out? They need to work longer hours, they need to work overtime in order to compensate for the real decline in their wages. Let's talk about welfare for the rich and the powerful. Now, we start off from a proposition that the wealthiest 1% of the population in this country owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. When we talk about the growth of...
He is talking about, like, AOC broke through with this notion of tax cuts and this the grotesqueness of it, and this idea that you should tax the wealthy more. And when the rich anchors was like, this is utterly absurd. Nobody will go for this. Nobody would ever go for taxing the rich more. And then they put it to a poll, and the overwhelming majority of Americans says, yes, we are on board for that. Sanders is talking about this 1990s. And he is talking about climate, the thing that they made a big contention about last night, back in 1987. 1987. But Whoopi Goldberg is unaware of any of this. She's unaware of any of this. This is not a good look on you, Whoopi. Belligerence is not a good look on you, especially when it's belligerence and wrongness. Absolute, completely wrong-headedness. Again, for like the third time, I appreciate your anger. I appreciate it on an intellectual level. And again, that anger to some degree gets across that you get how grotesquely unfair the system is. But you are talking to Bernie fucking Sanders. They are terrified of him. Why? Because he's calling for higher taxes across the board on the top 1%. And they know he means it. And not just know he means it, they don't know how far he'll go. Meaning he's a somewhat unknown quantity, especially in the capacity of getting in office. He's calling himself a democratic socialist. I guess I'm asking, why don't you know this? Why are you speaking to him in this particular way? Criticize him if you must, but the criticism should to some degree own up to reality. And this doesn't. But let's let her finish.
Do you agree with that?
Of course I do. I've been talking about that for years.
Well, no, I haven't. When Andrew came on and sort of broke it down, what he suggested, and I'm sure you know this because you've been spending time with him, but his idea was, if one of those companies gave every American $1,000, people's lives would change. Why? What do you think of such an idea?
If Andrew Yang talked to my grandma, and Andrew Yang explained to her, look, Amazon paid no taxes. And not only did Amazon pay no taxes, if they did pay taxes, we can give people $1,000 a month. And then I go and I talk to my grandma. She says, you know what? Nobody really broke it down to me like Andrew Yang did. How come nobody has been talking about this? What, these guys aren't paying any taxes? What the hell? Why isn't anybody talking about this? That would be exactly what is taking place right now with Whoopi Goldberg. She has hit her head in her ass. And I hate to say that. It hurts me to say that. I mean, I would imagine I would have a picture of Guinan up here somewhere where I would have to grudgingly go to her and try to get her signature and apologize for even saying this right now. But the fact of the matter is, it is somewhat true. For her to make this case that nobody else has said and has complained about this notion of companies paying no taxes. And you're talking to socialists, Bernie Sanders, who on his Twitter feed constantly, on debate stages, constantly, on one stump after the next for the last 30 years. Constantly. He doesn't shut up about this. He was a radical in Congress for this very specific reason. No one was on board for this notion of the stuff that he's talking about, and he hasn't changed and moderated one bit. If anything, in this election, he's gotten more extreme in this stuff that he's talking about. My point here is that your contention that you have never heard this from anybody else may be technically true. But just because it's technically true, it's kind of like the technicality of a mixed bag of M&Ms having one, yellow M&M and everything else is brown. It's like, yeah, that's technically true, but when you said mixed bag, it gives somewhat of a different connotation. The moment that you say that you haven't heard this from anybody else, the connotation is that the only person who was talking about it was Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang is, specifically the only person I've heard talking about the UBI. Andrew Yang is not. That's utterly preposterous that he's the one who's been talking about this notion that these guys have been paying no taxes. Sanders has been saying this for longer than Yang has ever even thought about getting into politics. And for you to say that nobody else has been saying it, it belies a certain ignorance of regards to your political space. My grandma talks to Andrew Yang, and then I go to talk to my grandma, and she derides me for not telling her that Amazon paid no taxes. Okay, grandma, I've been saying this for years, and I'm glad Andrew Yang was able to explain it to you in a way that gets across to you the injustice of it. But pump your brakes. I got the receipts. I like that. I got the receipts. I'm going to start using that ferociously. Let's hear Sanders respond to this.
This is what I think.
Okay.
I think that right now, when you have Donald Trump and his friends giving well over $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% in large profitable corporations, I think that's obscene.
Right, but will you change that?
Of course I'll change it.
Well, how do I know this?
Because I've been talking about it for 25 years.
Well, you haven't. Not for me. Not like this. Yeah.
But look.
She says, no, you haven't. Not for me. Not like this. No, Whoopi, you just weren't paying attention. There's a difference in those things. And this gets back to the whole electability argument. What's more electable? I look at the outside world, and from my perspective of what the outside world is, I think that this particular person can be sold in a better way. But again, this is all in your particular perspective of the world. And in Whoopi Goldberg's perspective of the world, the socialist that has been in Congress for the past 20 and 30 years screaming about climate change, screaming about gay rights, screaming about civil rights, screaming about workers' rights, screaming about all these things, screaming about corporations having oligarchic control over our political apparatus, screaming about it with every video that you can muster to show it to her. And yet, in the face of reality itself, Whoopi Goldberg says, you weren't talking about this to me. No, Whoopi. He didn't individually sit down with you and explain the economics of being screwed over. And I appreciate Andrew Yang for waking Whoopi Goldberg up. But I don't particularly like the belligerence involved in this particular video and exchange. Especially since Whoopi Goldberg does not know what the fuck Whoopi Goldberg is talking about. This is belligerence and wrongness. But again, thank you, Andrew Yang, for waking Whoopi Goldberg up. I appreciate it.
It's a little different.
What you got right now,
Yeah.
Whoopi, this is what you got. You got Amazon, owned by the wealthiest guy in America, made over $10 billion in profit last year. Do you know what they paid in federal income tax?
Nothing.
Not a penny.
Yeah, I know.
That's insane.
I know. So what I'm asking you is it's your position that these corporations, all of these big corporations will now, if you're elected president, one of the things you're going to make sure that they do is they pay their fair share, and that will trickle to the American people.
I'm astonished by this. Like, I feel like I'm going to fall out of my chair watching this. Like, everybody else that Bernie Sanders talks to, it is the opposite conversation. Everybody else that Sanders has a conversation with, it is the exact opposite. Are you going to go too far, Sanders? Are you going to tax him too much, Sanders? How much are you going to tax him, Sanders? How much? How are you going to pay for healthcare, education, college, expansion of Social Security? How are you going to pay for that, Sanders? How are you going to pay the $16 trillion, Sanders? Everybody else that he talks to recognizes that those programs would need to be paid for. And as such, he's going to get the money from somewhere. And considering the fact that he calls himself a socialist, it's probably going to be the top 1%. Everybody else gets that. Everybody gets that. That's what makes this conversation, I guess, so maddening to me. Whoopi Goldberg is having, it's like the bizarro conversation. The bizarro conversation. So, Sanders, I know that. I know they don't pay any taxes. Andrew Yang told me so. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to tax these corporations, Sanders? And it's talking to him like he's skeptical about the fact that the socialists, who's literally been browbeating these companies for the last several years, is somehow being dodgy about this. If he's being dodgy, it's about how far he would go. Meaning, he is most likely moderating what he is telling you, because the real shit will go a little bit further than that. Like, for example, when he's talking about nationalizing or community ownership of energy companies, he's talking about worker co-ops. I love that. That is literally anti-capitalistic rhetoric. When he's talking about protecting media companies and journalists, why do you think he's talking about that? He's talking about that because he feels attacked by media. And his thought is, if I can put a seal around the reporters and journalists, those journalists can do stories going after some of the media interests that otherwise they would be too terrified to go by, thinking that they may lose their job and their livelihood. If I protect them, I insulate them from their bosses. This is his point about the Washington Post stuff. He's being attacked by the Washington Post, and his thought of kind of pushing back on this is that. I guess my point is, you're talking to somebody who's probably the most rabidly anti-capitalistic person in that race. And by that, I understand some people will say, well, he's not a socialist. That's true. He's a democratic socialist. But there are limits to it. If anything, he's probably trying to save capitalism like a FDR. But from the standpoint of where Democrats are now, the FDR stuff is massively to the left. It is a sea change, a shift in the tenor of what the Democratic Party will be with the Sanders in office. And the issue here is not whether he would tax them, it is how much he would tax them. It is a massively different conversation. And it is just weird and bizarre that Whoopi Goldberg doesn't know that. Everybody else gets it. The issue with Sanders is that they consider him an existential threat, especially to the system, the way that we have the system oriented, especially in the context of politics on the left, in the Democratic Party, and companies, multinational organizations, environmental policy, all that stuff changes, and changes to the benefit of workers. She is so off base in this. And I would hope somebody who's nice to her and who loves her would sit her down and say, Grandma Goldberg, you were a little off base, Grandma Goldberg. That guy is a socialist. Do you know what the Russian Revolution was, Grandma Goldberg? He's not necessarily one of those, but he is, at the very least, names that, meaning he's somewhat anti-capitalistic in his orientation in regards to he believes that there needs to be a democratic system, even within the context of markets being in existence. Grandma Goldberg, you messed up. You're way off base. That's what I would hope. I mean, I understand Yang woke her up. Oh my God, there's corruption here. I get that. And I get that talking to Sanders now, you want to punch a politician. And I even get that you think that Sanders is part of this unruly bunch that is usurping the Democratic Party. The catch here is it is very possible that the Democratic Party maybe need to be usurped, especially from those particular issues that you yourself are talking about, that you yourself are now animated about. Because at the end of the day, it was the Democratic Party that allowed that stuff to take place and allowed that slide to the right. While this guy was out there screaming about the same thing he is screaming about right now, that particular shift to the right was disadvantageous to the American middle class and poor. You're way off base.
That's at the very top of my agenda. Absolutely.
Yes, that's his
Absolutely.
I don't really know because, I've watched you over the last several years and I've had lots of questions about what you want to do. So
Yang's also talking about giving every American money.
Yes.
All right, but I'm talking about giving every American a job, which I think is terribly important. We have an enormous amount of work to be done in this country in terms of climate change to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel. We're talking about creating up to 20 million good-paying jobs.
Yeah.
We're talking about rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. We're talking about building the millions of units of affordable housing
But everybody
that this
does-
country
everybody says
desperately.
that, Bernie.
No.
Everybody
Well, in
says
all
we're
due
gonna do it.
respect, I think the agenda that I am bringing forth is the most progressive agenda ever brought forth by any candidate, serious candidate running for president of the United
Which,
States.
can I?
Literally. Literally. That's true, by the way. It is the most progressive policy of any candidate. And not just that. Again, I kind of make this point that this is a weird way of having a conversation with one of the people that are on your panel if that person is named Bernie Sanders. And you can't honestly say, I've watched you over the past couple of years. There is no way you can say that and have a conversation with him just like that. You're so way off base. It's astonishing. I mean, honestly, there's nobody in this country that honestly believes that this guy is not the most lefty in Congress and in politics. He is considered a radical, literally considered a threat to the system itself. And Whoopi Goldberg is like, yeah, man, I've watched you for a couple of years, and everybody says that, Bernie. No, Whoopi, I'm sorry. It is impossible for you to have watched Sanders the last couple of years and have come to the conclusions that you have come to now. You are massively, massively, massively out of touch. And in this case, just outright belligerent and wrong. But again, your rage, I accept. And at the very least, you've woken up to this notion that this system is grotesquely unfair. Here's the catch. Yang has a point about the machines taking over thing, but by the same token, there's all sorts of work to be done. I mean, even the thing that we're talking about, the climate change thing. If you, as the government, said, we're going to ensure that there are no food deserts. So dilapidated buildings in the middle of, let's say, certain neighborhoods, we're going to build up grow rooms of food, delicious food, cheap, delicious food that is mostly automated. So the process for the most part is cheap, and we're going to do this as the government itself. I guess my point is there are all sorts of things that need to be done in the society itself that for the most part we put a bar on because you're looking at this purely through a capitalistic lens that a buck needs to be made in everything you do. Well, that's not the government's modus operandi. That's not necessarily something that the government needs, nor should it be held to capitalistic whims, especially when there are things to be done. And there are things to be done. That doesn't mean that what Yang is saying is wrong. What Yang is saying is it's right to some degree. You're going to see Uber drivers lose their jobs, truckers lose their jobs, taxi drivers lose their jobs, because it is going to be in the best interest of those companies to switch out human beings for robots. It's going to be cheaper, and they're going to be able to do it where it goes from point A to point B without really being all that involved in the process. Yes, they would have to upkeep the machinery, but no, they won't have to pay a person. Yang has a point. By the same token, what's the best way to do it? I'm actually on board for this notion of a UBI. I think that should be something in general. By the same token, I think it should be done a bit differently. I mean, I think it should be tied to the resources and that type of stuff and a kickback because people at that point can have a certain feeling about the money that they get as if they deserve it, as opposed to we're just being given it. It's a difference in the perspective of the individuals in the country, especially in a country like this that functions often against its own self-interest. What Sanders is saying is right here to some degree. I am on board for the UBI stuff. I am also on board for this notion of expanding the amount of work in the country itself, even if it means the government producing, creating jobs. There's a ton of stuff that we could be doing. Just need a bit of creativity. Let's see. Jason Link. Oh, thanks, man. Whoopi Dip got PhD in Brentwood shit talk. Okay, I have no idea what that means, but fair enough. And yeah, I agree with you that Whoopi Goldberg is talking out of her ass. Universal jobs guarantee. So here's the interesting part. The moment that you go with this notion of we're going to do something about climate and we're going to ensure that houses are solar paneled, because at that point those houses are energy dependent in and of themselves. There's less money that they have to pay from the standpoint of money going out each month. It is an energy bill. Meaning Bernie Sanders, part of his campaign pledge is essentially make your house energy independent. This is an argument that I've been making for the last 3 years, honestly. And so when I heard this, of him saying, yes, we're going to give subsidies in order to help people get solar panel roofing and so forth on their houses and make it easier for that stuff to take place. That means the houses are going to be independent of the power grid itself. It's still connected, but for the most part, people aren't paying an energy bill because people don't have to pay an energy bill. They're energy self-sufficient. I love that. I love that. If you're talking about any notion of freedom, part of freedom is not being tethered to stuff. Meaning, if you're working 50 hours a week, that's not really freedom per se, even though people talk themselves into believing that it is. By the same token, if you are strapped out of cash, barely making ends meet, persistently vulnerable, is that also free? Is it free when your mind is occupied with perpetual vulnerability? Part of one of those things of freedom, I would argue, is disassociating yourself from things, let's say certain responsibilities. Meaning, if I know I'm going to have food, if I know I'm going to have a place to live, if I know I'm going to have power, and if I know at the very least my basic needs are met, I am technically free. And in that freedom, I can choose a job that I want. I don't have to get stuck in a job that I hate just to make ends meet. I can make decisions on whether I want to take this career or that career. I can take decisions on whether I want to have childcare, if I want to grow a family. And even within the context of a government providing healthcare and those things also assist you in that. If you are working at McDonald's, making, let's say, a little bit more than minimum wage, but your healthcare is taken care of, your education is taken care of, then you're not as poor as if you were living in a society where those things were not taken care of. I hope you get my point. Freedom is not necessarily this just, oh, I'm free to down the streets without healthcare. Your freedom is always working in some tandem with the society and the community to which you find yourself. And yeah, there's something to be said about whether or not you're free if your needs, at the very least on a basic level, are not being met by a society that, if it wanted to, could meet those needs. If that is in the form of some kind of UBI, then fair enough. But when I think of freedom, that's the context to which I think of it as. Not some individual running in the stream, but a person who's part of a society that takes care of certain items within their society that allows them to make certain choices about what they want to do in life. If you're forced to work at a job that you absolutely hate at the best times of your life, then an argument about freedom gets a little dicey. Gets dicey. Just saying. Just saying. All right. I want to end this. Like, share, subscribe. Whoopi Goldberg, up your game, miss. I still love you. Put up your game, miss. Thanks all.